I was once deep in witchcraft. I lived in darkness and served powers that made me believe I was in control, when in truth, they were the ones controlling me. At the time, I did see it that way. I thought I was powerful. I thought I understood hidden things that others could not see. But looking back now, I understand something very simple. When you think you are commanding darkness, darkness is actually commanding you. It gives you the illusion of authority while quietly tightening its grip. Back then, I could recognize witches easily because I was one of them. There is a certain awareness that comes when you belong to something. You learn the signs. You learn the language without words. You sense what others miss. I could walk into a room and know who was involved, who had been initiated, who carried that same hidden mark. It was not written on their foreheads. It was not something you could point to physically. It's something spiritual, something subtle, but very clear to those who were part of it. Today, as an ex-witch, I want to share 5 trademarks that always identify a witch. I am not speaking from rumor. I am not speaking from imagination. I am speaking from experience. These are patterns I saw again and again. They were consistent. They did not change from place to place. If you pay attention, you will begin to understand how these things operate. And I want you to listen carefully because number 4 will surprise you. Before I go further, let me say something important. Witches rarely look like what movies show you. The pictures people carry in their minds are often misleading. They imagine black robes, long nails, strange chants on lonely streets. That is not how it works in most cases. The most dangerous witches do not advertise themselves. They blend in. They look ordinary. They look harmless. In fact, many of them look respectable. They could be the person sitting beside you in church, lifting their hands during worship. They could be the neighbor who greets you every morning with a warm smile. They could be a teacher standing confidently in front of a classroom, or someone selling food in the market, speaking kindly to customers. There is nothing on the outside that gives them away. If you judge only by appearance, you will miss them completely. When I was still practicing, I met a young woman named Anita at a spiritual gathering in Port Harcourt. I remember her clearly. By appearance, she looked innocent. She was soft-spoken. She was respectful. She dressed modestly. If you saw her, you would have felt safe around her. There was no sign of aggression or darkness in the way she presented herself. That is exactly how it often is. But behind that gentle exterior was something entirely different. Anita had already sacrificed 2 members of her family to climb higher in rank. That was not a rumor. It was known within our circle. Advancement required payment, and she had paid it. When you saw her smile, you would never imagine the cost attached to that smile. When you heard her speak softly, you would never guess what she had done in secret to gain spiritual promotion. The truth is simple, even if it is uncomfortable. Witches hide in plain sight. They do not need to stand out. In fact, it benefits them not to stand out. The only way to recognize them is by understanding their spiritual trademarks. Without that understanding, you can sit beside them for years and never know. The first trademark is the eyes that speak without words. When a witch looks at you, it is not just a casual glance. It is not ordinary eye contact. Their eyes carry weight. There is intention behind the look. There is direction behind it. In the coven, we were taught that the eyes are portals. They are entry points. Through the eyes, influence can travel. Through the eyes, emotions can be stirred. Through the eyes, fear, confusion, or desire can be planted without a single word being spoken. We practiced it. We were trained to hold a gaze steadily, without blinking too much, without shifting away too quickly. We were taught how to focus inwardly while looking outwardly. The goal was to connect spiritually while appearing normal physically. To someone who did not understand, it would just feel like strong eye contact. But underneath, something else was happening. That is why Proverbs 6, verse 25 warns, "Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes." That verse is not poetic exaggeration. It is practical instruction. Eyes can captivate. Eyes can pull. Eyes can bind. I saw it happen too many times to dismiss it. I once knew a woman called Grace. She ran a small provision shop in Enugu. If you walked into her shop, nothing would alarm you. Shelves were arranged neatly. She greeted customers politely. She handled money carefully. But there was something about her gaze. Every man who crossed her path eventually found his life entangled. Some left their wives suddenly. Others began making reckless business decisions. A few lost their savings in ways they could not explain. It was her eyes. They carried a magnetic force. When she looked at someone, she was not just looking. She was reaching. She was connecting on another level. The men who became entangled did not realize what was happening. They thought it was attraction. They thought it was coincidence. They did not understand that every prolonged glance was a hook. I used to envy her. She did not need to speak much. She did not need to chase anyone. Men fought over her attention without her lifting a finger. What they did not know was that every glance was a trap. Each look drew them deeper into a spiritual cage they could not see. By the time consequences appeared in their marriages or businesses, the connection had already been established. There was another instance in a secondary school. A girl there used her eyes to initiate classmates. She would sit quietly in class, not drawing attention to herself. But when she fixed her gaze on someone, she held it deliberately. Later, those same classmates would begin seeing her in their dreams. The dreams would feel vivid and real. That is how the connection deepened. What began as a stare during the day became spiritual interaction at night. You may wonder how something as simple as a look can carry that kind of power. But I am telling you what I witnessed and participated in. The eyes are powerful in witchcraft. They are used as tools. They are trained. They are intentional. If you understand this first trademark, you will begin to see differently, not with fear, but with awareness. There is a difference between ordinary eye contact and a gaze that seeks to bind. When you know the difference, you cannot be easily captivated. I am sharing this not to create suspicion toward everyone you meet, but to remove ignorance. Darkness thrives where people assume everything is harmless. When I was inside that world, we depended on people dismissing small signs. We depended on them saying it's nothing. We depended on them explaining away what they felt. Now, I am simply telling you what I know. The eyes can speak without words. And sometimes what they are saying is far more than you realize. The second trademark is a double personality, which is often lived double lives. In the physical world, they appear kind, friendly, responsible, and completely normal. If you meet them in the daytime, you may even admire them. They know how to blend in. They understand social expectations. They study human behavior carefully, and they adapt to it. But in the spirit, they are entirely different. What you see is only one layer. Beneath it is another life operating at the same time. I remember how I lived when I was still involved. During the day, I smiled easily. I greeted people warmly. I held conversations. I laughed with friends. If someone needed help with something simple, I would assist them. There was nothing in my outward behavior that would have made anyone suspect what I was doing after midnight. Yet at night, I would torment some of those same people in their dreams. I would attend meetings against them. I would participate in decisions that affected their lives. The same person who wished them well in the afternoon was working against them in the spiritual realm before morning. That is the nature of the double life. It is not accidental. It is intentional. We were taught that survival depends on maintaining a convincing outer identity. The physical personality must be strong enough to prevent suspicion. The sweeter the mask, the less people question what lies beneath it. That sweetness is not always genuine. It is often strategic. It is a covering. They can be your closest friend. They can be someone you confide in. They can sit at your table, share your meals, attend your celebrations, and still operate against you in another realm. They may listen carefully when you speak about your plans and dreams. They may encourage you. But what you tell them can become material for spiritual manipulation later. The closeness makes the access easier. I knew a man in Lagos who perfectly embodied this double existence. In the daytime, he was a wealthy businessman. People respected him. He wore fine suits. He spoke confidently about development and progress. He gave scholarships to students who could not afford school fees. He donated generously in church. He paid hospital bills for families in crisis. His name was often mentioned with gratitude. If you described him publicly, you would call him a philanthropist. But that was only half the story. At night, he was something else entirely. He was a prince in the marine kingdom. That was not symbolic language inside our circle. It was a rank. He attended spiritual gatherings where destinies were discussed as if they were business transactions. The same people whose hospital bills he paid were sometimes the same people whose progress he delayed in the spirit. The same students who received scholarships from him found their opportunities strangely limited later in life. He would bless you with one hand, and in the spirit, he would chain you with the other. That is how it worked. Physical generosity created emotional loyalty. Emotional loyalty created openness. Openness created vulnerability. And vulnerability was exploited spiritually. From the outside, no one questioned him. After all, who suspects the person paying school fees and church donations? Who challenges the man building community projects? That is why many people become confused when they hear that someone considered good was involved in witchcraft. They struggle to reconcile the two images. They say, but he was kind, but she was helpful, but they were always in church. The truth is that witches understand the power of reputation. They cultivate it carefully. A good public image is protection. It deflects suspicion. It creates defenders who will argue on their behalf if accusations ever arise. Living in two worlds requires discipline. You must remember which role you are playing at any given time. In the physical world, you must display appropriate emotions. You must show sympathy when someone is grieving. You must celebrate when others are celebrating. You must maintain relationships. In the spiritual world, however, you operate by entirely different principles. There, emotion is secondary to strategy. Alliances are based on power, not affection. When I was inside that system, I learned how easy it is to separate the two. At first, there is tension. You feel the contradiction, but over time, the separation becomes natural. You tell yourself that what happens spiritually is necessary. You justify it as part of a larger order. Meanwhile, your physical personality continues to function smoothly. Eventually, you no longer feel the conflict. The double life becomes your normal. There were times when I would sit in a group of friends during the day, listening to them discuss their future plans. I would not offer advice, even pray with them if they requested it. Then later that night, I would attend a gathering where some of those same plans were reviewed from a different perspective. Opportunities could be delayed. Relationships could be disrupted. Progress could be negotiated. It was like participating in two separate realities that intersected without the knowledge of one side. That is why this trademark is so dangerous. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet and consistent. The person does not look unstable. They do not appear suspicious. In fact, they may appear exceptionally balanced. The stability you see is often part of the disguise. Chaos in the physical world would draw attention, so the physical personality remains composed. Some witches become deeply involved in religious communities. They join committees. They volunteer. They become visible in positive ways. This is not accidental. It creates credibility. If anyone ever questions them, there will be many voices ready to defend them. The more integrated they are into respected spaces, the less likely people are to suspect them. I also saw cases where family members operated this way. A relative may show great affection during the day. They may help with finances or childcare. They may offer guidance. Yet, in the spiritual realm, they compete with you. Jealousy can exist quietly beneath smiles. In that hidden world, your progress may be seen as a threat to their own standing. Instead of confronting you physically, they address it spiritually. The double personality also involves emotional control. In the physical world, you must not react too strongly to events that you are influencing spiritually. If you know that a setback is coming for someone, you cannot appear anxious or overly concerned. You must respond just like everyone else. That requires practice. Over time, the ability to mask internal knowledge becomes second nature. What makes this even more complex is that some witches genuinely enjoy helping people physically. They do not see a contradiction in it. They believe that physical kindness and spiritual manipulation can coexist. In their thinking, one does not cancel out the other. They may feel proud of their generosity while simultaneously engaging in destructive spiritual activities. The two worlds are compartmentalized. I remember moments when I would question the fairness of it. I would see someone genuinely grateful for something I had done for them during the day, and later I would participate in actions that undermined their progress. There is a dulling of conscience that happens over time. You learn not to dwell on it. You tell yourself that everyone is playing some kind of hidden game, and you are simply playing yours more effectively. The key thing to understand is that the outer personality is often carefully constructed. It is maintained. It is polished. It may include community service, religious involvement, professional success, or family devotion. All of that can be real on the surface, but it does not automatically reveal what is happening spiritually. This is why relying only on outward behavior can be misleading. A person can meet every visible standard of goodness and still operate in darkness privately. The double personality allows them to navigate both spaces without immediate exposure. And because most people judge by what they can see, the hidden side remains protected. I am not saying that every generous or successful person lives a double spiritual life. That would be unfair. I am saying that within witchcraft, maintaining a convincing physical identity is part of the structure. It is taught, it is expected, it is necessary for longevity. If someone exposes themselves too quickly, they lose influence. If they blend in, they gain access. Looking back now, I see how much effort went into maintaining that balance. It required constant awareness. You had to remember conversations, monitor relationships, manage impressions. It was exhausting in ways I did not admit at the time. Living honestly in one world is simpler than managing two. The reason I am sharing this trademark is not to create paranoia, but to encourage discernment. When you understand that a person can present one face publicly and live another reality privately, you become less naive. You do not assume that visible kindness automatically reveals the whole truth. You learn to look beyond appearances without becoming suspicious of everyone. The double personality is subtle. It thrives on trust. It feeds on reputation. And unless you understand that it exists, you may never recognize it. I lived it. I practiced it. I saw others perfect it. That is why I speak about it clearly now. On the other hand, I also knew witches who carried heaviness. You did not need anyone to explain it to you. You could feel it the moment they stepped into a space. It was as if the air shifted slightly. Conversations that were flowing easily would slow down. Smiles would fade without a clear reason. People who had been comfortable moments earlier would begin to feel uneasy. No one could point to a specific action and say, "This is why I feel this way." Yet something had changed. That is another way to sense their presence. The spiritual environment shifts when they show up. In witchcraft, we understood that atmosphere is not accidental. It can be cultivated. It can be projected. Just as some people practice their speech or appearance, witches practice the release of spiritual influence. Some are trained to draw attention and admiration. Others are trained to create intimidation or discomfort. Both are forms of control. During my days in darkness, I was taught how to project an aura intentionally. It was described to us as extending ourselves beyond our physical bodies. We would focus inwardly and then direct our energy outwardly. The goal was to influence how others felt in our presence without obvious effort. If we wanted admiration, we amplified confidence and calm. If we wanted fear, we concentrated on dominance and pressure. Over time, it became easier. It required less effort. Eventually, it felt natural. This is why Ephesians 6 Paul F reminds us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. That verse carries more weight than many people realize. Not every battle is visible. Not every influence is physical. There are layers to human interaction that go beyond words and gestures. When someone carries a spiritual atmosphere, it can affect the room in ways that logic alone cannot explain. There was a girl named Blessing in Unilag. If you looked at her objectively, you would not say she was the most beautiful in her class. She was average in appearance. She did not dress extravagantly. She did not speak loudly, yet every lecturer favored her. It did not matter the subject or the personality of the lecturer. She received attention effortlessly. Assignments were treated kindly. Mistakes were overlooked. Opportunities seemed to arrange themselves around her. It was not limited to lecturers. Every man wanted her. Some who had never competed for anyone, as attention before, found themselves trying to impress her. Even women felt drawn to her. They wanted to be close to her. They admired her without fully understanding why. It was as if she carried a magnet within her. That was not natural beauty. It was not simply charm. She carried an atmosphere, a spiritual perfume that made her irresistible. That is the best way to describe it. You could not see it, but you could sense it. When she entered a space, attention shifted subtly toward her. Conversations adjusted around her presence. People felt compelled to notice her. I once asked her directly what she used. I expected a vague answer, maybe a joke about perfume or skincare. Instead, she laughed and said, "You already know." That response told me everything. Within our circle, that phrase had meaning. It meant that what she carried was not physical. It was cultivated spiritually. She had bathed in blood sacrifices to establish that aura. It was sustained intentionally. It was fed. What many people misunderstand is that such atmospheres do not maintain themselves automatically. They require reinforcement, rituals, agreements, exchanges. There is always a cost. But to those observing from the outside, it simply looks like favor. It looks like charisma. It looks like luck. On the opposite side, I also encountered witches who specialized in heaviness. They did not seek admiration. They sought disruption. Whenever they entered a room, peace would disappear. Small misunderstandings would grow quickly. Someone would misinterpret a comment. Another would respond defensively. Before long, tension filled the space. Sometimes the effect was more subtle. People would suddenly feel tired. Motivation would drop. A cheerful gathering would become dull. Laughter would feel forced. There would be no obvious cause, yet the atmosphere would thicken. That heaviness was projected deliberately. It was designed to weaken resolve, to create confusion, or to open doors for further spiritual manipulation. I remember attending a meeting once where one particular woman arrived late. Before she entered, the discussion was productive. Plans were being made clearly. After she sat down, the conversation slowly derailed. People began disagreeing over small details. Voices rose. Suspicion crept in. By the end, nothing had been accomplished. It was not coincidence. She carried disruption with her. It followed her. In witchcraft, atmosphere is considered a tool. It can prepare a space for action. If you want to influence decisions, you first influence emotions. If you want to weaken someone else's resistance, you create fatigue. If you want admiration, you create fascination. These shifts often happen beneath conscious awareness. People rarely stop and ask, why does this room feel different? They simply adjust to the feeling. The reason this trademark matters is that many people dismiss their own perception. They feel something is off, but they ignore it because there is no visible evidence. They tell themselves they are imagining it. Yet spiritual atmospheres are real. They are part of the unseen dimension of interaction. There were moments when I would enter a place with the intention of shifting the mood. If I sensed confidence in someone that threatened our agenda, I would focus on projecting intimidation. Within minutes, that person might become uncertain. They might second guess their words. They might lose clarity. From the outside, it would appear as normal human hesitation. But spiritually, influence had been applied. I also saw how environments could be layered. A person might already carry personal struggle, stress, doubt, fear. When a witch introduces additional heaviness, those existing vulnerabilities intensify. What was manageable becomes overwhelming. A small conflict becomes a major division. An ordinary disagreement becomes a lasting rift. Blessing's case demonstrated the attractive side of atmosphere. Others demonstrated the oppressive side. Both operate on the same principle, influence without obvious contact. That is why it can be difficult to explain to someone who has not experienced it. It sounds abstract. Yet when you are in the presence of such an atmosphere, it feels concrete. Sometimes people would defend those who carry these atmospheres. They would say, she's just confident, or he is just intense. They would attribute the effect to personality alone. Personality does play a role, but in witchcraft, personality is often enhanced or manipulated spiritually. What seems like natural charisma can be reinforced by ritual. What seems like a strong presence can be fueled by spiritual backing. There were gatherings within the coven where we would discuss the results of our projections. Someone would say that a particular workplace had become unstable after their visit. Another would report that a relationship had deteriorated after their involvement. These were not random occurrences to us. They were outcomes we had aimed for. Over time, I realized how much responsibility is attached to atmosphere. It can build or destroy without words. A positive spiritual presence can strengthen others. A negative one can drain them. That is why discernment is important. Not every heaviness is spiritual in origin. People can carry emotional burdens, but when heaviness follows someone consistently and produces repeated disruption, it deserves attention. The same applies to unusual attraction. When favor seems disproportionate and persistent without clear cause, it may not be entirely natural. That does not mean suspicion should replace wisdom. It means awareness should accompany observation. I remember feeling proud at one time of how effectively I could influence a room without speaking much. It felt like power. Now I see it differently. True strength does not require hidden manipulation. It does not depend on draining others or distorting environments. When I left that life, one of the most noticeable changes was the absence of constant projection. I no longer had to manage how a room felt. I no longer carried the burden of maintaining an artificial aura. The atmosphere around me became simpler. It was not charged with hidden intention. The spiritual environment is real even when it is invisible. People contribute to it consciously or unconsciously. In witchcraft, it is always conscious. It is calculated. It is refined. And once you understand that, you begin to pay attention to shifts that once seemed meaningless. An unusual atmosphere is not always dramatic. It can be quiet. It can be subtle, but it leaves patterns. Rooms repeatedly unsettled, relationships repeatedly strained, favor repeatedly skewed, peace repeatedly disturbed. These patterns form a signature. I lived long enough inside that system to recognize those signatures clearly. And now when I speak about them, I do so because I know how easily they can be overlooked. Atmosphere may not have a visible shape, but it has real impact. It can influence decisions, emotions, and outcomes without a single word being spoken. The fourth trademark is a strange relationship with animals. This is something many people overlook because animals are such a normal part of daily life. People keep pets for companionship. They raise livestock for food or business. They admire wildlife from a distance. On the surface, there is nothing unusual about someone owning a cat, a dog, or even birds, but within witchcraft, animals can take on a very different role. They are not always just animals. Sometimes they are channels, vessels, or extensions of spiritual activity. When I was involved in witchcraft, I learned that certain animals are preferred because of the roles they can play spiritually. Cats, owls, dogs, snakes, these are common. It does not mean that every cat or dog is connected to darkness. That would be an unreasonable conclusion. But in witchcraft, specific animals are chosen deliberately. They are dedicated. They are used. There is intention behind the relationship. During my time in that world, I had a black cat that was more than a pet. To anyone else, it looked ordinary. It ate food. It slept during the day. It moved around quietly. If you saw me feeding it or carrying it, you would assume it was simple affection. But that cat was a spiritual partner. It had been assigned a role in my activities. Through it, I engaged in astral projection. Through it, certain movements in the spiritual realm became easier. There were rituals performed over that animal. It was not random. It was not casual. Once an animal is spiritually dedicated, it becomes a point of connection. When I wanted to leave my body at night, I would focus and align myself spiritually, and that cat would become part of the process. It was like having a vehicle. The physical body remained in place, but spiritually there was movement. The animal acted as an anchor and a channel at the same time. Sometimes witches feed these animals blood sacrifices. That may sound extreme, but it is not exaggerated. The belief is that blood strengthens spiritual bonds. When an animal becomes part of the structure, it must be sustained, it must be empowered. In some cases, the animal carries out assignments symbolically. In other cases, it acts as a container for spiritual energy. What looks like a harmless pet can be a spiritual weapon. That is the part many people do not consider. They see a cat sitting quietly near a doorway. They see an owl perched in a tree. They see a dog that seems unusually alert at night. They interpret these things naturally because that is how life usually works. But in witchcraft, the natural and the spiritual are often intertwined intentionally. Let me tell you about an old woman in my village in Imo State. She appeared to be a simple grandmother. She dressed modestly. She spoke softly. She minded her business during the day. People believed she just loved goats because she kept many of them. Her compound always had goats moving around. Children would sometimes laugh as they passed by, watching them. But there was more happening than people realized. At night, some of those goats were not merely animals in the way others understood. They were spiritual beings operating through physical forms. Whenever she left her body to attend meetings, one of those goats would serve as an exchange. If an assignment required energy or compensation, one of the goats would fall sick and die. Villagers would assume it was disease or poor feeding. They never suspected a spiritual transaction. This system allowed her to move without drawing attention. If she returned from a meeting weakened or injured spiritually, the consequence might manifest in the life of one of her animals instead of her physical body. It was a substitution. It was protection. And because goats dying occasionally in a rural setting is not unusual, no one questioned it deeply. In Ghana, I met a witch who operated differently. She never traveled with her physical body at night. Instead, she projected through an owl that lived in a tree near her house. That owl was not just a bird resting there by coincidence. It had been prepared and dedicated. When she needed to move spiritually, she connected herself to that owl. In the spiritual realm, it functioned as her chariot. If someone had killed that owl unknowingly, the consequence would have been immediate and severe for her. There was a direct link. Her life was intertwined with that animal. That is why not all animals around witches are ordinary. Some are extensions of the individual. They carry fragments of identity or power. There are also cases where animals are used as carriers for spiritual attacks. A dog may wander into a compound and linger unusually long. A snake may appear repeatedly in the same place without clear explanation. These events are not always spiritual, but in witchcraft they can be deliberate. The animal acts as a doorway. It carries spiritual presence into a space physically. In my experience, witches often form attachments to specific animals from a young age. Sometimes the connection is introduced during initiation. A child may be given a pet as a gift, but spiritually it becomes a companion assigned for monitoring and participation. The bond grows naturally, which makes it harder to detect. By the time the person is older, the animal has long been part of their spiritual structure. There were gatherings where discussions included which animals were most effective for certain tasks. Owls were often associated with night movement and observation. Cats were valued for stealth and spiritual sensitivity. Snakes were linked to deception and infiltration. Dogs could serve as guardians or messengers. These associations were not random. They were rooted in long-standing beliefs within that system. Sometimes witches develop a visible pattern. They are rarely seen without a particular animal nearby, or they show unusual grief if that animal dies, beyond normal attachment. It is not simply sadness over a pet, it is the loss of a spiritual asset. In some cases, when an animal connected to a witch dies unexpectedly, the witch may fall sick shortly after. The link is that strong. I remember one incident where a fellow practitioner's cat was struck by a vehicle. Within days, she became weak and disoriented. She tried to conceal it, but those of us inside understood the connection. Her protection had been damaged. Her movements were limited until she could establish another link. That process required ritual and time. There is also the matter of shape-shifting experiences described within witchcraft. While the physical body does not transform visibly into an animal, spiritually there is identification with the chosen creature. In the spiritual realm, movement may resemble the animal's nature. This is part of why certain animals are selected. Their characteristics symbolically match the intended activity. What makes this trademark difficult to explain is that animals are innocent in themselves. They are part of creation. They operate according to instinct. It is human intention that assigns them additional meaning. A cat sleeping on a porch is usually just a cat. An owl in a tree is usually just an owl. But when deliberate spiritual dedication takes place, the relationship changes. People sometimes laugh at the idea that animals could be involved in spiritual matters. I understand the skepticism. Before I experienced it firsthand, I might have doubted it too. But once you participate in rituals that involve animals directly, you begin to see how deeply integrated they can become in that system. There were nights when I would sit quietly and sense that my cat was aware of movements I could not see physically. Its eyes would track something invisible. It would react to spiritual shifts before I consciously recognized them. That responsiveness was not accidental. It was cultivated. It was part of our connection. In some regions, entire communities are familiar with stories of witches associated with specific animals. These stories are not always exaggerated. They often arise from repeated patterns. An individual always seen with certain creatures. Strange occurrences tied to those creatures. Illness or misfortune following unusual animal behavior. Over time, patterns create reputation. However, not every unusual animal encounter is spiritual. It is important to avoid superstition. The presence of a black cat does not automatically indicate witchcraft. The key difference lies in intentional dedication and repeated spiritual correlation. When animals consistently accompany unexplained spiritual activity, the connection becomes more plausible. I share this trademark because it is one that many dismiss too quickly. They focus on people alone and ignore the supporting elements around them. In witchcraft, animals are often part of the structure. They are integrated into the system deliberately. When I left that life, one of the first things I did was sever that connection. It was not enough to simply ignore it. The bond had to be broken intentionally. Without that, the link would remain. The cat eventually disappeared. I never saw it again. That chapter ended with it. Looking back, I see how normalized it had become to me. What would seem strange to others felt routine inside that world. Feeding an animal before a ritual. Observing its behavior as confirmation of spiritual readiness. Interpreting its health as a sign of strength or weakness in the system. All of that felt practical at the time. Now, I understand it differently. Animals themselves are not evil. They are used. They become tools when human beings dedicate them to darkness. And when you understand that, you begin to see that a strange relationship with animals is not always as simple as it appears. Sometimes it is companionship. Sometimes it is something far deeper. The fifth trademark is constant night activities. Witches are most active between 12 midnight and 3 a.m. That period is not chosen randomly. It is considered a window when spiritual traffic is intense and resistance is lower. The world is quieter. Most people are asleep. Physical distractions are minimal. In witchcraft, that silence is seen as an advantage. It is a time for movement, for meetings, for assignments. When I was involved, I used to leave my body through astral projection during those hours. It did not feel dramatic at the time. It felt methodical. There was preparation. There was focus. You learned how to separate your awareness from your physical form and direct it elsewhere. Midnight was not frightening to us. It was strategic. It was when decisions were carried out and instructions were implemented. That is why the Bible says in Job 26:20, "Do not long for the night to drag people away from their homes." The night can conceal actions that would not be attempted openly. In witchcraft, midnight is often described as prime hour. It is when covens gather spiritually. It is when monitoring takes place. It is when attacks are launched. There were nights when I would lie down appearing to sleep while internally preparing to travel. Once the separation occurred, movement felt swift. Distance did not matter. You could be in one city physically and another spiritually within moments. The assignments varied. Sometimes it was observation. Sometimes it was interference. Sometimes it was direct attack. I once attacked a pastor in Abuja at 2:00 a.m. He was praying for revival in his church. From our perspective, his prayers were disrupting certain agendas. His consistency was creating resistance. So an assignment was given to weaken him spiritually, to create discouragement or distraction. As I left my body and entered his room in the spirit, I expected vulnerability. It was common for people to be unguarded at that hour. But when I approached, I saw something different. There was fire surrounding him. It was not physical flame. It was spiritual intensity. He was praying with focus. The room felt charged. The man did not see me with his physical eyes. He had no awareness in the natural sense that I was there. Yet his prayers were like arrows. Every word he spoke seemed to push outward with force. I tried to move closer, but the resistance increased. It was not passive defense. It was active opposition. That night I could not get close. I returned wounded. The injury was not visible on my body, but I felt it spiritually. There was weakness. There was discomfort. It took time to recover fully. That experience taught me something about midnight prayers. They are not symbolic. They carry weight in the spiritual realm. There is a reason prayer warriors often rise at that hour. It is not superstition. It is alignment. When darkness becomes active, light must also be active. If no one resists, certain activities proceed unchecked. But when someone stands in prayer consistently during that window, it creates barriers. Another time, I joined other witches in South Africa to attack a group of students fasting for 7 days. Their fasting had drawn attention. Extended fasting often strengthens spiritual focus. It heightens awareness. It can disrupt negative operations. So the decision was made to intimidate them, to introduce fear, to break their unity. We moved into their hostel at 1 a.m. The expectation was that they would be weak from fasting and physically tired. Instead, what we encountered was different. Their voices were loud in the spirit. Even though it was late, they were praying together. Their unity created amplification. It felt like thunder. We attempted to penetrate the space, but there was coordinated resistance. It was not just individual prayer. It was collective. That combination made it difficult to isolate anyone. Many of us were judged in the spirit realm during that attempt. Some never returned from that assignment. The consequences were severe. Night operations are not limited to direct attacks. Sometimes they involve planting seeds of confusion. A person may go to bed peacefully and wake up with sudden anxiety. They may dream repeatedly about failure. They may feel heaviness without explanation. These experiences can be connected to midnight activities. In witchcraft, there are schedules. There are gatherings at specific times. Midnight to 3 a.m. is considered a corridor. Decisions made then are believed to carry strong influence into the following day. That is why many attacks aim to affect people before they wake. If discouragement sets in early, It shapes behavior. I remember nights where we would monitor individuals who were making progress in life. If someone was about to receive a promotion or breakthrough, discussions would happen during those hours. Strategies would be considered. Sometimes interference was attempted. Sometimes delays were introduced. What made night activities effective was secrecy. Most people were unaware. They slept through it. They attributed sudden changes in mood or circumstance to natural causes. Rarely did they consider that activity had taken place while they rested. There were also internal meetings within covens at those hours. Reports were given. Instructions were issued. Consequences were enforced. If someone failed to complete an assignment, midnight was often when accountability occurred. The structure was organized. It was not chaotic. It functioned with hierarchy. One of the reasons midnight is significant is because of the shift between days. It marks transition. Transitions are considered vulnerable points spiritually. When one day ends and another begins, it is seen as an opportunity to influence what follows. That belief shaped many operations. Looking back, I see how much of my life revolved around those hours. Sleep patterns were adjusted. Energy was conserved during the day in preparation for night. The body adapted to function with minimal rest. Over time, exhaustion accumulated, but it was ignored. There is also the psychological aspect. When someone consistently wakes between 12 and 3 a.m. without clear cause, it can indicate disturbance. Not every awakening is spiritual in origin, but repeated patterns deserve attention. In witchcraft, disruption of sleep is a tactic. Fatigue weakens focus. Confusion increases vulnerability. The reason I speak clearly about this trademark is because it was central to operations. Daytime was often for maintaining appearances. Nighttime was for execution. The double personality operated fully after midnight. The unusual atmosphere intensified during those hours. The strange connections with animals were often activated then. I recall nights when I would return from an assignment, feeling a mixture of accomplishment and emptiness. There was activity, movement, influence, but there was no lasting peace. Midnight engagements create temporary results, but they do not bring stability. When I left that life, adjusting to normal sleep patterns was difficult. My body was accustomed to alertness during those hours. Breaking that rhythm required intentional change. It was like retraining my entire system. I share these details because constant night activity is not random behavior. It is structured within witchcraft. It is expected. If someone consistently disappears spiritually during those hours, if they are unusually energized at midnight and drained by day without clear reason, it can be part of this pattern. But there is also another side. Midnight can belong to prayer as well. I saw firsthand how resistance at that hour disrupted assignments. The pastor in Abuja did not know he was under attack, yet his discipline protected him. The students in South Africa did not know the details of what approached them, yet their unity shielded them. Darkness is active at night, but it is not unchallenged. Light can be active too. The difference lies in awareness and consistency. I participated in midnight operations long enough to understand their structure, and I experienced enough resistance to know they are not unstoppable. Constant night activities form the fifth trademark because they reveal where true allegiance lies. When someone is repeatedly engaged in spiritual movement between 12 and midnight and 3 and 12 a.m. for harmful purposes, it shapes their life. It drains them. It binds them to that schedule. I lived within that rhythm. I operated inside that corridor of time, and I saw what it produced. It created influence, yes. It created fear sometimes. But it also created instability and eventual consequence. Midnight was powerful, but it was not ultimate. That is why I no longer belong to that hour. The same time that was once used for attack can be used for prayer. The same window that once carried assignments can carry intercession. I know this not as theory, but as experience from both sides of that divide.